Since the early 2000s, one middle-aged Scottish screenwriter has brought us some of the most groundbreaking British television of the past 20 years. And his name is Armando Iannucci. After finding success with 1997's I'm Alan Partridge, Iannucci went on to pen one of the best British sitcoms ever made, The Thick of It, which starred Peter Capaldi as Malcolm Tucker, who only a decade later would go on to be cast as the 12th incarnation of the Doctor by none other than Steven Moffat. We're talking about Steven Moffat. I feel like you'd be hard-pressed to find another television writer who's been both praised and absolutely dogpiled on to the degree of Steven Moffat. Obviously most well known for the second best and second worst eras of Doctor Who, where he acted as showrunner from 2010 to 2017. Moffat was also partly responsible for writing the very best parts of the BBC show Sherlock, but he was also partly responsible for writing the very worst parts of the BBC show Sherlock, which bears the question, is Moffat a good writer or not? He's brought us some of the highest quality British television ever, but he's also pissed off a lot of people with his complete lack of awareness of what his audience desire and his overcomplicated scripts. This magical little pixie is an enigma. It's by no means a simple question. Moffat, out of any writer I've ever admired, has a countless number of good and bad habits that have been prevalent all throughout his career. So let's take a look at each one of his eras and decide once and for all what kind of writer Steven Moffat is. Alright, let go.
I happen to like the contrast, I happen to like comedy drama, I happen to like being not categorizable as either a comedy or a drama. I don't see why you should be. I don't see why humour should be a device that has to be isolated. I think it's perfectly acceptable that humour is a part of drama, it's a part of life, you know.
Now, I'm not inside of Moffat's head, and I don't want to make an ass out of you or me, but I'd say his early career of penning silly sitcom after silly sitcom was the most comfortable professionally he'd ever be again. I won't spend too much time on his early career, you know, there's much juicier untouched territory post Sherlock, but I think it's telling that the 3 sitcoms he penned before blessing his presence with Doctor Who is some of the most consistent showrunning he's ever done. And this is because the format suits him so well. Moffat thrives when he's tasked with writing one-off stories with a beginning, middle and end. And, you know, while sitcoms of this era might have had running jokes or minor arcs across the season, every episode was expected to only focus on one story. The 3 sitcoms Moffat penned during this time were Press Gang, about a gang of school newspaper journalists, Chalk, about a gang of school teachers, and Coupling, a show all about sex.
And they're all getting together and having sex.
For someone who's never seen a single sitcom before and was born in 1971, these shows were all with the bee's knees. Press Gang, which I genuinely think is the best of the 3, even though it's old, still has Moffat's writing style throughout, but it feels so much more natural than most of his other shows. And I think that's because Moffat's ego was non-existent at this point. This was his first rodeo. He hadn't yet got to the point where he was shagging his way around television studios like a mechanical digger. Yeah, sure you were, Moffy. The kids in this show act and sound like actual kids.
Get out! Just get out, Spike. Get out of my newsroom and I never want to see you again for the rest of my life, ever!
Okay, fine.
Where are you going?
The storylines, whilst very limited due to the minuscule budget and restricted setting, are often pretty engaging, and the character relationships are just surprisingly enjoyable to watch. The most fascinating thing about Press Gang is watching Moffat's style develop over time. The original concept was actually pitched by his father, but with the condition that every script would be written by Steven. But you can see throughout the 5 seasons Steven's confidence grow, with the first season having plot lines around, you know, missing stationery.
I was wondering if...
Where's my ruler? Has somebody taken my ruler?
Oh no, not your ruler. Check for fingerprints. Arrest everyone with fingers.
I mean, compare that to the Series 5 finale, which is a fucking mental 20 minutes of television. Drug overdoses and suicide by shotgun and Linda almost burning to death to then escape. Or did she? Was it all a dream? Genuinely, I can't think of a better start to a writing career than this show. It really gave Moffat the space to develop his writing skills, and it gave him the confidence to explore the crazy, non-linear, twisty writing structure he'd later be known for. But after Press Gang concluded with its 5th season, Moffat had an idea for another sitcom. One that would push the envelope of sitcoms. One that wouldn't be cancelled after just 2 seasons. Oh wait, it was. Chalk is kind of shit, but for a show that was absolutely panned by critics and audiences on its release, I don't think it's as bad as it was given credit for at the time. Yeah, everyone's overacting like they're on CBeebies, the jokes are painfully obvious at the setup, the setting is mundane and uninspired, the characters are unrelatable and caricatures, but for an early 80s sitcom, they were the first to do it in 1997. That's mental. There's no excuse. I mean, by this point we had Seinfeld, Friends, Fresh Prince. I mean, say what you want about them, but at least they were pioneers. Chalk comes out almost a decade later with a style so old, Moffat's own mum had to tell people he was ill when writing it. But luckily, Steven redeemed himself with his next show, Coupling. The characters were relatable and charismatic, it was raunchy for the time, and it got people excited. This show's been compared to Friends a lot over the years, but I'd say it shares way more similarities with something like How I Met Your Mother. The character dynamics are a lot closer to that show, and almost every subplot centers around the whole more socially experienced character reveals an unwritten social rule or tactic to the main character shtick.
All of us, in our time, are visited by the Melty Man.
What? You're the sexless innkeeper.
Oh my god, you're right. He's totally the sexless innkeeper.
What the hell is the sexless innkeeper?
I think this show opened Moffat up to realizing the importance of having a story, allowing the comedy to enhance the plot lines, but not having the plot rely on the jokes to be investing. But now, with an actual successful sitcom under his belt, Steven was a known up-and-comer in the land of low-budget British TV, and was soon on the radar of a certain Welsh nerd. Steven Moffat has contributed more episodes to the revived era of Doctor Who than any other writer. But chances are, if you know who this man is, it's because of this show. The consensus around Moffat's era of Doctor Who has well been established by this point, and looking at every single genius or baffling decision he made during this time would take me 2.5 hours. And I know this because I'm currently reading from a rewritten script after the first was way too long. So instead, I've chosen just 4 episodes written by Steven that I feel encapsulates everything either right or wrong when it comes to Moffat's writing for Doctor Who. When it was initially decided Russell T Davies would be reviving Doctor Who for modern audiences, there was very little predicting how it would turn out. With a show as vast and beloved as it was, any writer who was brought in were always going to have their own perspective on what the show should be. A show like this makes great allowance for a writer to write to their strengths. Do they prefer to focus more on plot, politics and social commentary, the sci-fi elements, education, horror comedy, character relationships? All of these aspects have been ingrained in the show since it began, but every writer is naturally going to lean towards one or more of these. When Steven was first invited to write a story during the first series, even he didn't yet know what his version of the show was. But I mean, it's an understatement to say he found his footing with The Empty Child and Dr. Dances. Steven's adult style comedy was always going to be present in any one of his scripts.
I thought, I write sitcoms. I've been writing sitcoms for 10 years. I have no idea how to do this. I was just saying, what do you do? What is a scene if it doesn't have jokes in it?
And those jokes were definitely prevalent in his first story, but I think that the horror elements woven into the script surprised him most of all. More than any other writer for the show, Moffat just naturally developed the perfect balance of horror for a younger audience without overstepping any mark. But a better example of these aspects he developed for Doctor Who didn't come with his first story, but with his 3rd ever episode of Doctor Who. During Series 3 of the show, showrunner Russell T Davies brought in Steven Moffat as a guest writer to write another great episode of Who. He'd already proved himself with his last 2 efforts for the show, that being the Empty Child 2-parter and The Girl in the Fireplace. But this time he was tasked with writing an episode that had very little involvement of the Doctor and his companion. Back during this time when the budget was smaller and the show was better, a Doctor or companion light episode was written so that the actors can fit more episode filming into their schedule. This would usually happen once every season. This can either be a positive, and we end up getting an episode that's so different to anything we've ever seen before, or the restriction can be too much for the writer and we end up getting this. But Moffat actually said when writing the episode that this condition relaxed him, because in his mind, if the episode got any scrutiny, he could just blame it on David Tennant's absence. But instead, he wrote Blink, one of the best episodes of Doctor Who ever made. At this point, we already had the Empty Child 2-parter and The Girl in the Fireplace, but Blink is what truly showed the public that when tasked with writing a simple story with his own characters, his own villains with very little budget, his brain was capable of producing premises that a writer of his caliber could only dream of creating. One of Moffat's greatest strengths as a writer is his restraint when it comes to when he reveals certain aspects of the plot. And this either comes down to his trusting of the viewer to stick with the story even if not all the pieces are there, or his confidence in his own writing for the intrigue alone to keep viewers engaged. But whichever one it is, these choices to unravel the story slowly and meticulously, learning what's going on at the same time as the characters, is the key ingredient to making these sorts of episodes work. And Moffat at his best was able to do this whilst the hooks of established stakes and relatable, likeable characters keeps us engaged, wanting to know the answers. Mix this with a terrifying villain with obscure yet easily understandable rules and one of the best, most intense scenes this show has ever had, and you get a piece of truly iconic television.
I don't know what stopped you talking, but I can guess. They're coming. The angels are coming for you. But listen, don't blink. Blink and you're dead. They are fast, faster than you could believe. Don't turn your back. Don't look away, and don't blink. Good luck.
The reason why Moffat was so good at writing Doctor Who sometimes is that he understood that perspective is everything. Everyone knows the story of Blink, but let's break it down from the Doctor's perspective. Doctor meets Sally Sparrow, who gives him a one-sided transcript as well as some important contextual information. He doesn't know why or when he'd need it, but one day him and Martha are touched by a weeping angel and sent back to 1969. The Doctor films himself reading the transcript and responding to it, where he informs an earlier version of the girl that gave him this information of what to do in order to send the TARDIS back to him and Martha, as well as trapping the angels in an internal paralysation from which they would never wake. I mean, until the building is demolished and moves one of them. A short time after, the Doctor meets Billy, who was also sent to 1969 from the future. The Doctor tells Billy to hide the film transcripts in parts in 17 DVDs. After this, Sally does the job and presumably the TARDIS travels to 1969 and picks up the Doctor and Martha. As slimy-timey flimey as this episode is, it's the choice of perspective that makes it stand out from other stories. Learning what's happening with Sally rather than the Doctor and Martha adds to the intensity. We don't know the Doctor has a plan until the last 10 minutes of the episode. This stripping of comfort means there's real stakes that you believe, not fake stakes that you don't believe. Oh, the Doctor's got the sun in him. I hope he doesn't die. Oh, thank goodness. Are there problems with this episode? No, it's perfect. But it's a testament to how good a script is when I don't even want to search for them.
Why did the Doctor and Martha take a taxi at the end of the episode when they have a time machine?
Shut up! This is just an episode of amazing narrative decisions, something that Moffat has like a 70% success rate at. But when he hits, he hits. And when he misses, we get The Wedding of River Song. The Wedding of River Song is the finale of Moffat's second season as showrunner, and probably the best example of when Moffat's tying up of story arcs goes horribly wrong. If Blink is his magnum opus, The Wedding of River Song is his, parvum opus. I already knew that. He's written worse episodes than this, but in terms of telling a cohesive story in a satisfying way, it doesn't get much messier than this. At the beginning of the season, the Doctor gets shot by a mysterious astronaut and dies. We're then introduced to a younger Doctor, almost 300 years before his death. In the same episode, it's revealed that Amy's pregnant. We're introduced to the Silence, a race of aliens that have inhabited the Earth since the beginning of time, or a religious order, or both, I don't know. Amy keeps seeing a woman with an eye patch, there's a little girl who regenerates. There's a lot to tie up after this opening two-parter. But we do get some answers scattered throughout the season. Amy's baby is River Song, and she can regenerate because Rory on the TARDIS in the time vortex, and the lady with the eye patch is part of an organisation formed to kill the Doctor by raising River as an assassin, who at the end of the second to last episode is put into the astronaut suit so that she can be there on the day to kill the Doctor. And this specific location was chosen because it's a fixed point in time which cannot be changed. You have 45 minutes to tie all of this up and make it make sense, Moffat. Do your best. So the episode begins with what many have said is an interesting concept executed badly, whereas I see it as a confusing concept executed confusingly. All of time is happening at once, which means there's a couple ancient Romans riding chariots, Dickens is writing books, and Churchill is Prime Minister in modern day London. Okay, I don't even know how one would execute this concept without it being riddled with contradictions. Would there not be 115 billion humans walking around? Whatever, alright, that's the least of the problems. But all of time is happening at once, because back on the beach when the Doctor died in episode 1, River actually didn't shoot him straight away. She drained her weaponry or something, and so time got all fucked up. But hey, this is Doctor Who. If you start trying to conceptualize the time elements, then you're never going to enjoy it. Alright then, this massive plot point I'll just not think about. That makes perfect sense. For the bulk of the episode from here, it's pretty standard if you accept the initial fuckery. It's basically just about the Doctor trying to convince River to allow time to happen normally and let her kill him, which she does eventually do. The Doctor dies his inevitable death and everyone's sad and the children sing a little song. And then we get probably the only plot reveal in history that makes me genuinely sick to my stomach. So it's revealed that for this entire episode, the Doctor was in a robot Doctor suit, which means this entire episode was pointless. I mean, the Doctor at any point could have whispered this information to River, even on the beach before she shoots him. This makes less than no sense. Regardless of that fact, why do we have so many scenes of the Doctor appearing to solemnly accept his death? No detailed explanation of why the Silence are doing what they're doing. Why, if the whole entire point of them choosing this specific location and this specific date and time was because it was a fixed point that couldn't be rewritten, the Doctor was still allowed to be tiny and in a robot. I mean, why did they even choose River for this job? She was clearly like unable to stop herself. They could have done this. They could have done this with anyone. Like whoever put on this spacesuit. I'm pretty sure they could have given the spacesuit to anyone, and the exact same outcome would have happened. Except it wouldn't have, because they chose the one person who actually didn't want him to die. The amount of extra shit you've added, and you've still left out key questions that we need to know. The one thing about writing a time travel series is to know the rules. What are the rules, Steven? I'm not exactly sure whose decision it was to make this season so painfully centered around a story arc, but it's never a good idea. Back in the day, a series arc was meant to merely build intrigue for the finale, but it should never get in the way of the stories told during the episodes leading up. Some hinting, graffiti on the wall, some foreshadowing here and there, but it should never feel like the show is forcing itself to explain questions that they brought up. Series 1's Bad Wolf was simply a reference to the location of the series finale. Rose ate the TARDIS and scattered the words across the series as a message for her past self. Satisfying? In my opinion, yeah, but more importantly, it's simple. If you're not invested in this plot thread, it doesn't devalue the actual story being told. But for this series, you have to care about everything, otherwise you'll care about nothing. And by the finale, it feels like the show's got a gun to its own head, saying, now I have to explain everything in 45 minutes, this is ridiculous. But you're the one that opened up all these questions, Steven. But what's worse is while watching the episode, you can feel how only certain aspects of this thread were fully realised by Steven before shooting. I'm sure he had ideas of where this story would go, but definitely not the whole picture. Even like through production, this awful green screen. I mean, you had all the same actors there on the day during the shooting of the first episode. Why couldn't you just do it then if you knew what was going to happen, Steven? But you didn't, did you? You made it up as you went along. These are small things, but noticing that this is just a completely different location, these things do matter. I remember back when I was watching Flesh and Stone in Series 5. I was a tiny little 10-year-old boy watching it with my parents. The Doctor loses his jacket like halfway through the episode, and then he hasn't got a jacket. He has a little talk with Amy, who can't open her eyes, and then he runs off. But then he comes back, and out of the blue he talks to her. He delivers her a speech about remembering her past, and in the corner of the frame you can tell he's wearing a jacket. And I remember telling my mum,
That's a plot hole. He's not supposed to have his jacket.
She said yeah. And then weeks and weeks later we sat down to watch the series finale, and it was all explained. And it was a really satisfying experience. And it didn't make me want to peel my skin off. And I know the hours are long, I know the demand is high while being a showrunner on this show, but it was your second season, man. Why couldn't you just plan it ahead? Yeah, but anyway, The Wedding of Riversong, one of the most convoluted plots in the entirety of Doctor Who. One of the most convoluted scripts Steven's ever written, and it all stands as an example to show that maybe Steven wasn't cut out for the showrunner role. It takes a huge amount of planning, foresight, time management, skills, not pitching a modern retelling of Sherlock Holmes to BBC while you've got a full-time show-running job.
In the same year, I did, this is ridiculous, 3 new Sherlock films and 14 new episodes of Doctor Who.
Why would you even do that to yourself?
The next episode I want to look at is The Day of the Doctor, the 50th anniversary special. By no means my favourite episode, by no means a perfect episode. But not only does it show how great of a writer Steven can be when he's under immense pressure, one of the main strengths of this episode is actually something I want to talk about regarding Steven's era of Doctor Who as a whole, which I will get to in a bit. But let's give a bit of context. So it was clear early on by the studio and Steven that the Series 7 of the show would lead up to a grand special episode celebrating the 50th anniversary. Moffat went through a lot of variations about what the plot would be for this special, also trying to keep into account who was actually under contract to appear in the episode. But unfortunately,
Christopher Eccleston said no. And that was awful. That was just awful. I was so depressed that day.
I mean, obviously I could have seen that coming. And Moffat's been very clear that this was one of the most unhappy, stressful times during his professional career.
The Doctor Who 50th, I mean, I think I've said it many times, but there wasn't anything very enjoyable about doing that. Everybody was cross with me. I remember that. Just everybody was cross. Everybody. The script was light, so everyone was cross at me.
I mean, watch any interview with Moffat around the time of the 50th. You can feel the stress.
Breaking it, mate. Breaking it. How do you think I feel? This time, nobody's seen it. And an hour and 15 minutes after nobody's seen it, everybody's seen it. And I have no idea what then happens. Do I have to go into hiding? But it's scary. Yes, it's scary. I thank God I haven't got anything else big coming up, like, I don't know, the Doctor regenerating or the reveal of how Sherlock survived. Thank God that's not my next couple of months.
And that's one thing I got to give to Moffat. He's painfully honest in interviews. You know, it doesn't feel like what he's saying is being media trained. He just kind of says exactly how he's feeling, and I like that. I respect that. But scarily close to production, Moffat came up with an idea. What if there was another Doctor between McGann and Eccleston who we never saw? A version of himself he never speaks of because of the shame he feels about the atrocities of the Time War. Though a risky decision to ever make a significant change to the lore of this show, what better time to do it than the 50th anniversary? And more than that, the change just works. It adds so much intrigue and depth to a character we thought we knew all we needed to know about, and suddenly we want to know more. Of course it's fan servicey, but this is the definition of fan service done right. These new characters introduced and old ones reintroduced are given so much to work with. But I'm not going to talk too much about the plot. I think the plot's competent, I think it's well paced. But what really elevates this episode for me, and I think elevates a lot of Steven's Doctor Who episodes, even his most awful ones, is the dialogue. Because more than any other show I think Steven's ever worked on, Doctor Who really gave him an opportunity to flex his dialogue writing. And when I talk about his dialogue, Steven definitely has a style of writing that can come across as irritating or corny or cringe. But you can't deny he does have the ability to deliver some truly impactful dialogue when needed. The best scenes in a lot of Moffat's episodes are simply people having a conversation. Not when someone's being super witty or confident or quippy, but he's able to deliver a painful real conversation so well. Say what you want about him, but he truly understands people. He might lack when it comes to narrative threads or payoffs, but he knows how people interact with each other, and he can trust the audience to know this too. He's completely comfortable having his characters speak through context and express to us exactly what they're thinking whilst saying the opposite. I mean, my favourite scene in this entire episode is just when the three doctors are in a dungeon having a conversation. And we should be thankful that we had a showrunner who was such a fan of this show. Otherwise, I don't think we'd get half the amount of emotion through this dialogue that we did.
Great men are forged in fire. It is the privilege of lesser men to light the flame.
That's fucking bars, boy. I'm gonna get this tattooed on my forehead. Obviously, Moffat's great at powerful one-off lines, but it's also the topics of conversation for the dialogue exchanges that he's so good at choosing. The conversation about whether the Doctor counted how many children were on Gallifrey that day, or Clara talking to the War Doctor about how his eyes look so much younger than her version of the Doctor. Whether it hits you emotionally or not, you know, you have to appreciate the effort put into this dialogue. Now, the subject of dialogue kind of carries into the last episode I'm going to talk about. Fasten your seatbelts, boys and girls, because I'm going to talk about the big one. The big Moffat Capaldi masterpiece. Series 9's Hellbent. Yep, thank you, yeah, I know, thank you. Thanks everyone. One of the biggest complaints around Moffat's era to this day was the choice to centre the plot of the Series 9 finale, Hellbent, around the character of Clara. But why did people have a problem with this? Well, everyone who holds this opinion of Hellbent probably does for their own personal reasons, but I'll provide as much context as I can. Clara was introduced as the new companion for the Doctor halfway through the 7th season, after the death of two of the most beloved characters in the history of the show. She featured as a side character in 2 episodes leading up to all this, all to plant the seed that she's the impossible girl who keeps showing up in the Doctor's life to serve as a mysterious series arc. And in my opinion, she's not a great character when she finally boards the TARDIS in the 7th episode. She's smarmy and confident and witty and always makes the Doctor look like a big dum-dum. I mean, she's flawless. She lacks flaws. How compelling. I think Moffat thought that the mystery around her character alone would be enough to get people to care about her, but when a character trait is so in tandem with plot, it usually throws all relatability out the window. And this was made even worse when at the end of the 7th season it's revealed that Clara kept showing up in the Doctor's life because she threw herself in the time stream and saved him at every point throughout time. There's a forced importance here that for most of the audience didn't seem earned. Now, by the time Matt Smith died and Capaldi took over, a lot of people were sick of her beautiful face and wanted rid of her. I actually think her chemistry with Capaldi's Doctor is some of the best this show's ever seen, but that's by the by. People wanted her gone. At the end of Series 8, Jenna Coleman was being very wishy-washy around whether she wanted to leave the show. She decided she wanted to leave, so Series 8 ends with her and the 12th Doctor parting ways, but then she changed her mind and wanted to come back for one more episode, so Moffat wrote a beautiful end for her in the Christmas special, in a great scene that mirrors Matt Smith's last episode, but then she changed her mind, and Moffat quickly wrote another scene where she's back for a whole other season, and everyone was really happy. But to be fair to Moffat, this was where he doubled down on a character trait he hinted at in the previous season. Clara was finding all of these adventures too fun. She was getting reckless, and this would be the cause of her demise in the first part to a 3-part finale, Face the Raven. In this episode, she tries to do something clever that the Doctor would do, but instead a raven flies into her and she dies. She's dead. Look at her. She's clearly dead. Not coming back. Dead. But at the end of the episode, the Doctor's sent to a mystery location by a mysterious force who were technically responsible for the death of Clara. We then got Heaven Sent, one of the best episodes of the show. 45 minutes of the 12th Doctor roaming around a mysterious castle, seemingly constructed to get some sort of confession out of him. I'm not going to go into the plot of this one. It's Heaven Sent. It's amazing. Now, Clara does appear in that episode, but merely as a figment of the Doctor's imagination, because as I previously mentioned, she's dead. The Doctor escapes the castle at the end of the episode and ends up on Gallifrey, previously thought to be destroyed, but then shown in the 50th anniversary that it was merely lost in time. And everyone was rightfully excited. Finally, a big Gallifrey series finale. We're gonna hear shit about the Time War and see those big collars and the dome with the suns and sand and shit. You know, Doctor by himself on his home planet, no companion because she's dead. But yeah, that's the lead up to Hellbent. That's the context out the way. Now let's get into the actual episode. So the very first scene of the episode straight away shows us what we're going to be in store for. The Doctor arrives at a diner in Nevada, and who do we see? Now, if you couldn't tell from the countless number of times this character's come back from being written off in the show, any footage of Moffat talking about the character of Clara shows he has real love for her. The reason why he decided the return to Gallifrey should be character centered around Clara still kind of baffles me though. I mean, he must have known people would be disappointed. I mean, you could make the argument that the return of the Daleks in Parting of the Ways heavily involved Rose, and the return of the Master heavily involved Martha, but those episodes gave more than enough focus on the stuff we were excited for. But also, we thought we were done with Clara. We had an emotional, brutal death 2 episodes ago, and what seemed like an entire episode exploring the Doctor's grief towards Clara. Nobody was asking for a definitive end to this character, because we've already had 3. But regardless of that, Moffat's love for this character clearly made him feel she deserved a better ending than what she got. And so, looking at this episode from that point of view, closing the arc of her and the Doctor's dangerous relationship and giving her a nice little send-off, it's a pretty well written episode. For the most part. The beginning scene between the Doctor and Clara is just a classic example of Moffatian dialogue. These characters that we know and who know each other are speaking like they've never met, and it's done in such a natural, subtle way. Just a perfect way to build intrigue. I'll just say as well, the 15 minutes we do get a focus on Gallifrey and the aftermath of the Time War is really great. I mean, the Doctor barely says one word in these first 15 minutes, and it's really effective. The Doctor sits with the High Council and they try and wheedle information out of him on the hybrid. What's the hybrid, you ask? No fucking clue. When I say that this episode is well written, I'm merely referring to dialogue, interactions between characters, and how the story Moffat wanted to tell pans out. There's still a lot of stupid shit thrown in, don't get me wrong. The hybrid was the big series arc of Series 9, and I kind of loved the concept, but the execution is absolutely awful. It was first mentioned by Davros in the 2nd episode of the season.
There was a prophecy, Doctor, on your own world. It spoke of a hybrid creature. 2 great warrior races forced together to create a warrior.
He kind of just tells us about it for no reason, completely unprovoked, and has nothing to do with the plot of the episode. That's how we learn about it. It's mentioned again by the Doctor when this awful character is brought back to life.
But Ishilda isn't just human anymore. A little piece of alien inside her, so in a way she's a hybrid.
Again, just feels like an excuse to remind us of the important word we need to know about. It's revealed in Hellbent that the reason for Clara's accidental death and the Time Lords trapping the Doctor in a big castle was to get him to explain what the hybrid is. I don't think it's ever explained why they go to these weird lengths. I mean, they end up just plain asking him in this episode. Also, he doesn't even know what the hybrid is, and so I don't know why the Time Lords think he does. At the end of Hellbent, the Doctor has a chat with Arya and they discuss who the hybrid could be. She says maybe it refers to the combination of the Doctor and Clara.
What if the hybrid wasn't one person, but 2?
2.
A dangerous combination of a passionate and powerful Time Lord and a young woman so very similar to him. Companions who are willing to push each other to extremes.
Obviously, the prophecy was that the hybrid would destroy Gallifrey, and the lengths that the Doctor's going to in Hellbent to get Clara back would have destroyed Gallifrey. And I like this concept, but do we need it? It's so frustrating Moffat feels the need to do this type of thing all the time. Just write a compelling series of Doctor Who. I already find the concept of the Doctor going to drastic lengths to bring his friend back interesting. You don't need to force these confusing Easter egg one-liners into what should be just some nice character arcs. It very strongly feels like the word hybrid was just thrown into these random episodes with no real plan because the execution was just so poor.
The hybrid is not half Dalek, nothing is half Dalek. What is that sound?
So the Doctor's return to Gallifrey turns out to just be a ploy. He knew that they had the means to bring her back and he blames them for her death. What I really do like is how this episode communicates the Doctor's love for Clara. It's new for this show to portray portray this type of toxic dependency, and I think it adds to the character of the 12th Doctor so much. He felt lost and unsure of himself when he regenerated, but Clara was the one to make him feel himself again. It makes sense, and I think it's kind of vital to explore how dependent he is on her. Although I do feel like this exploration doesn't really go far enough. I'm not against him killing the General, but it isn't really given the weight it deserves.
We're on Gallifrey. Death is Time Lord for man flu.
Even if I change, it feels like dying. Everything I am dies.
I mean, the act alone shows how far he would go for Clara, but through the use of this upbeat action music and jokes around men being stupid, it doesn't really feel like the show is taking this decision very seriously. The scene in the cloisters between the Doctor and Clara is genuinely one of my favourite scenes in the show, so I'm just going to show it.
Look at me again.
Sorry, what?
In the eye, look at me.
What is it?
How long has it been for you since you last saw me?
Oh, I was stuck in a place.
They, what? Who are we talking about?
They wanted something from me, information. It really doesn't matter.
What happened to your coat? Velvety one, I like that one. It's very doctory.
I changed it.
Why?
Well, I can't be the Doctor all the time.
Tell me what they did to you. Tell me what happened to the Doctor.
20 feet of pure diamond. Harder than diamond. But you break through anything, given time.
How much time? The hybrid. What is it? What's so important you would fight so long?
It doesn't matter what the hybrid is. It only matters that I convinced them that I knew. Otherwise, they would have kicked me out. I'd have nothing left to bargain with.
What were you bargaining for?
What do you think? I had to find a way to save you.
How long?
It was fine.
And you will answer. How long was the Doctor trapped inside the confession dial?
We think 4.5 billion years. He could have left any time he wanted. He just had to say what he knew.
4.5 billion years.
If she says so.
Why would you even do that? I was dead and gone. Why? Why would you even do that to yourself?
I had a duty of care.
Of course, the acting's great between them, but the dialogue between them is top tier. They've both realised how damaging their relationship is to everyone else, but the way the Doctor still can't bring himself to admit how much his emotions for her trumps his reasoning is painful in the best way possible. I mean, completely fair enough if this episode went in a direction you weren't expecting or didn't want, but I love this depth of confliction and complicated character emotions. Moffat really truly cares about these two, and it's commendable. And their final goodbye really hits hard emotionally if you're at all invested in their relationship. A lot of people believe that the fact the Doctor forgets Clara gives him an excuse to not confront his grief, that it devalues the pain he went through in Heaven Sent, but I disagree. If you take the story of both episodes into consideration, I don't think Heaven Sent is the Doctor accepting loss and overcoming grief. It's the opposite. It's him literally stopping at nothing to say no to the universe, to avoid at all costs him ever having to come to terms with the loss of Clara. And the Doctor making the decision with Clara to end their relationship is growth enough. I mean, after the fact, he still feels he's lost someone, he's still feeling the grief, but it took 4.5 billion years and almost destroying Gallifrey to finally decide to let go. Him finally breaking through that wall was a triumphant moment, but it wasn't him letting go. He was bitter and angry, he felt hard done by at the end of Heaven Sent, but here at the end of Hellbent, he's just simply sad.
Look how far I went for fear of losing you. This has to stop. One of us has to go.
Lastly, another criticism that's brought up a lot around Moffat's writing is that he can't let go of characters, but I don't really think that's true. He definitely tried his hardest to give his characters happy endings, but I wouldn't call that not letting go. But I fully acknowledge in any other show I would still see this as a problem. The ability to show how even the characters you as the audience love can have tragic endings can be a really powerful tool. It gives the show stakes and shines a light on the brutal reality of life, but as Moffat says,
I don't think Doctor Who's that kind of show. Doctor Who's a big-hearted, optimistic show that believes in kindness and love, and that wisdom will triumph in the end. I don't believe it's the kind of show that says there are bitter, twisted, nasty endings, because it's not. It's not gritty. It's aspirational. It says it can work. I think there aren't enough people or enough shows saying that, and I'm damned if Doctor Who is going to join in with the general chorus of despair.
And I kind of agree with him. I don't think it's unreasonable to want to inspire hope and happiness in a show made, I'm sorry, but primarily for children. You know, this isn't Better Call Saul, it's Dr. Whoop-de-Who. Now, don't get me wrong, this episode contains a huge amount of fuck shit. A gargantuan amount of fuck shit centered around issues Moffat has always had in his writing for this show. But I mean, this is the episode that's arguably gained the most amount of criticism and scrutiny around his run, which is sad because you can feel how much effort and heart he put into this. I mean, I agree with most people in this episode. I didn't want it to go this way. When I was watching this as a kid, I was fucking sick of Clara. I mean, he inadvertently set everybody's expectations way too high, and that is 100% something to criticise. But at the end of the day, you know, Doctor Who was his childhood show, and he wrote it the way he wanted to. I mean, the balls it took to completely revamp the show in 2011 when he took over, to add an entirely new Doctor into the mix, to replace a young, attractive, goofy, beloved lead role with an old, grumpy curmudgeon questioning whether he's a good man or not. These were huge risks that, for the most part, paid off. And it's all due to the Mothmeister, Steven Moffat.
If you forget for more than 2 hours consecutively that you are privileged to be here, get the hell out. And I never did. I never ever, even when I was in my last year so tired I could barely stand, I never forgot that sort of glorious feeling of I'm the showrunner of Doctor Who.
Now, I haven't touched on half the things associated with Moffat's era of Doctor Who, but we still have way too much to get through, and, you know... In summary though, Doctor Who is a show that pushed Steven's writing abilities to the edge and over, and as frustrated as the fans got with him, especially towards the end, we wouldn't have got the good without the bad. I mean, still, it would have been nice to. And whatever you think about his later seasons, I still believe that last scene of Twice Upon a Time is one of the last great scenes we've had from this show. And, you know, I'm glad he did it. And I think he gets a bad rap. Rap? Is it rap or rep? I feel like everyone always says rap, but surely it's like rep, like reputation. Like, what does bad rap mean? It doesn't make any... Oh, what the fuck is that? Mark Gatiss and Steven Moffat have famously written 2 shows together during their careers, a modern retelling of Sherlock Holmes and a modern retelling of Dracula. Now, since Sherlock ended in 2017, there's been countless videos about how bad it is. I will talk about Sherlock a little bit, but it's actually the latter of the 2 shows I find more interesting. Now, even though these 2 shows were written by both Moffat and Gatiss, it's telling how similar the style is and how the main problems of these 2 shows aren't inconsistent from Moffat's own previous work. When you look at a writing duo such as Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant, or Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, the projects both Gervais and Wright have worked on their own since really highlight why they work so well together with their counterparts. Gervais's work now lacks the subtlety and wit it used to have with Merchant, and Wright's scripts are missing the heart and jovial camaraderie that Pegg brought. But with Gatiss and Moffat, whilst I think their process of writing is very similar, I don't feel like they complement each other all that much, and this is made pretty clear by how Sherlock turned out. Now, regardless of how you feel about these 2 shows, I think it was a good idea for Gatiss and Moffat to take a stab at some characters in the public domain. It's nice to every now and then get a fresh interpretation of these iconic characters, and I salute them for giving it a go. Well done, guys. Alright, you've done well. I'm proud of you. Well done, guys, you did it. You did well, guys. Unfortunately, they took a big steaming poo-poo on both of them. When Sherlock first began in 2010, I remember it being pretty universally praised. It felt new and innovative, mainly due to the writing and style. It was flashy, intricate, confident, but a better word to describe it is stylistic, in that the show itself comes across like it acts a lot smarter than it is. This is most obvious in the scenes of Sherlock deducing thingies. Now, this was present all the way back to the first episode, but I think why so many people, including myself, were still drawn to it was because it made us feel smart. And this was early on in the show, before it went off the rails narratively and the facade of being a detective drama for smart people started to slip. I mean, you watch a scene where Sherlock denounces the theory that a man shot himself in the right side of the head because he's left-handed. But how do you know he's left-handed? And he explains it and it makes so much sense. Coffee table on the left-hand side, coffee mug handle pointing to the left. Power sockets habitually used the ones on the left. Pen and paper on the left-hand side of the phone because he picked it up with his right and took down messages with his left. Do you want me to go on?
No, I think you've covered.
There's a knife on the breadboard with butter on the right-hand side of the blade because he used it with his left. And it's highly unlikely that a left-handed man will shoot himself in the right side of the head. It's absolute genius, and I feel smart for saying, yep, yeah, makes sense, yeah. After Sherlock told me all of this. But then you got to block out all the quick edits and distracting stylization for a second to think about the scene that just took place and realise you can absolutely easily shoot yourself in the head with your non-dominant hand without even thinking about it. I mean, like, try it. I mean, don't try it. Just, you know, like, do the action. Give it a go, but don't actually give it a go with a, you know what, doesn't matter. I mean, give any of the scenes involving deducing a second thought and you'll be surprised at how many of the things Sherlock says leans more into random shots in the dark as opposed to actual analysis.
The engraving. Harry Watson, clearly a family member who's given you his old phone. Not your father, this is a young man's gadget.
How can you possibly know about the drinking?
Shot in the dark, good one though. Power connection, tiny little scuff marks around the edge of it. Every night he goes to plug it in to charge, but his hands are shaking. You never see those marks on a sober man's phone, never see a drunk's without them.
No, this is my dad's phone.
But that's a young man's gadget.
Yep, it's my dad's. He gave it to me when he upgraded.
What about the scratches on the phone?
Don't mean anything. They're just scratches on a phone. It's a very small hole. Sometimes people have trouble plugging it in.
Yeah, I don't drink a drop and I have the same scratches.
This being said, for a casual first-time viewer, you can't deny these scenes of deduction are fun to watch, and it's the main catalyst for the show's style. A huge problem with Sherlock though, and one that I already touched on with Moffat's DW run, is, again, plot elements are set up with no idea where to go. And this is what I mean when I say him and Gatiss don't complement each other as a writing duo. As an actor, Mark's pretty great. But as a writer, he's just okay, especially compared to the quality scripts Moffat's been able to achieve. Even looking at the 9 episodes he's written for Doctor Who, they range between average and very bad. But the comedic elements, the quick witty dialogue, these are all traits he shares with Moffat. And I think teaming up to write Sherlock just gave them an opportunity to indulge in these traits. But no one was there to stop them and say, guys, before you have Sherlock jump off a building in plain view of John, and we shoot the scene as if that actually happened, do you have a plan for how he survives? Because they didn't. You can't write a show like this. You're writing yourself into a corner just to take a sledgehammer and then bust through the next wall. I'm not saying you need to plan out your series from start to finish. Breaking Bad didn't have a plan. That's an unfair comparison. Shut up, you little bitch. But they wrote the show with the understanding it could go anywhere and then played the story out through both natural progression and what was most cinematically engaging. But with Sherlock, constantly scenes will happen with the sole purpose of people going, holy shit, without any actual means of it making sense narratively. And then they have the fucking balls to make fun of the people wanting to know the answers. Haha, get it? This is you fucking losers. You want to know how the beloved main character of the show that we created escaped an impossible death? Why don't you get a life? Why don't you get a life instead? And then at the end of series 3, they seemingly bring back another main character who shot himself point blank in the head. We saw his brains leak out, and we still wondered, how can he be alive? Because we expect this impossible bullshit from this show. Just to then rock up 2 years later and be told, obviously he's dead. You saw him shoot himself. This is gaslighting to the highest degree. Actually, while we're on the topic, I want to talk about this Sherlock death mess. The fact there was no plan in place by Moffat and Gatiss as to how he actually survives this is so apparent. The little conspiracy crew that get together in the next series is clearly a commentary on real fans of the show trying to figure out this mystery, but they mainly exist to just hammer home the message of, oh, stop trying to dissect it. Nothing we write will ever be satisfying. And I guess they're right. The actual explanation Sherlock gives, which I'm guessing is true, is very convoluted and kind of kills the mystique around it, but also because it feels like manipulative storytelling. So he lands on an airbag and then does like 6 Texas switches and puts a squash ball under his armpit to stop his pulse. But what about this shot of Sherlock clearly landing on the concrete? Was that shot and put in there because there wasn't any actual real plan of how he survives and Moffat just made one up that resembles what we saw as close as possible? The reason this explanation feels underwhelming isn't because no explanation would have been satisfying, it's because it's so obvious it was strung together after the fact. An explanation that makes complete sense and had hints towards it when we first saw the death, I think, would have been satisfying. You're not going to please everyone, but who cares? Some people are stupid. Some people get upset when magic tricks are revealed. What, did you think magic existed? Did you think magic was real? But for most people, most normal people, debunking the fact that magic isn't real isn't an unsatisfying explanation. You can still have a satisfying explanation. Finding out the entire platform everyone was standing on rotated whilst the Statue of Liberty was covered up is a satisfying explanation. But finding out that instead a blank plate was inserted in post and all the audience were actors pretending to be amazed isn't satisfying. There is a difference. You can't use this scapegoat as, well, you would have been disappointed anyway. No, I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't. Now, this is primarily a Steven Moffat video, so I'd be remiss if I didn't take a good look at the script he himself has called the best one he's ever written. Better than Blink, Heaven Sent, The 11th Hour, this, in his opinion, is the best writing of his career. Series 2, Episode 1 of Sherlock, A Scandal in Belgravia. When looking at adaptations, I tend to focus less on the source material if at all possible. For me, an adaptation doesn't need to follow the original to a T. The foundation should be the same, whether that be the characters, the setting, the tone of the world the story takes place in, the plot points. An adaptation can emulate one or all of these things, but there aren't any set rules, except for one. The original work should be respected. When the word faithful is used referring to adaptations, it doesn't mean keep as much of the source material the exact same as you can, but the elements that matter should be the same. The aspects of the source material that make it unique or important to people. But maybe when writing A Scandal in Belgravia, Moffat didn't want to do this. Maybe it wasn't meant to be a direct adaptation of A Scandal in Bohemia, but
Mark Gatiss and I, have been more faithful than most people who do Sherlock Holmes, even though we've transposed it to the modern day. It's actually quite a faithful version of Sherlock.
Okay, maybe not. I'll go more into how this episode differs from the original story as we go on, but for now, let's just focus on the story Moffat wrote. Now, as of today, A Scandal in Belgravia is the second highest rated episode of Sherlock, just behind the one where he dies. And after watching it multiple times, I don't really know why. The plot is fairly simple. Holmes and Watson are tasked with retrieving some indecent images of a member of the royal family held by Irene Adler. It's later learned that the phone containing these images also have a lot of information that could topple the British government, most notably, information of a planned terrorist attack that the government know about but want to keep under wraps so that the terrorists don't know that they know about the attack. The episode mainly centres around the relationship that grows between Irene and Sherlock and the chess match they play throughout the story. The episode begins right where we left off in the previous episode, concluding the cliffhanger but with the added detail of everyone looking 18 months older. Most likely because they didn't plan how the scene would play out. And I might as well take this opportunity to say I really don't like Andrew Scott's performance as Moriarty. There isn't really any depth to his character, he just acts randomly erratic and unhinged with nothing below the surface. Sometimes he talks in a weird high-pitched voice.
I thought you might call. Hi. Then I suppose Daddy's had enough now.
Sometimes he talks normally.
All those little problems, even 30 million quid just to get you to come out and play.
And sometimes he'll decide to just scream for no reason.
That's what people do!
And it's always accompanied by this sound effect, probably to hide how goofy these random outbursts sound without it.
Say that again!
I will find you and I will skin you.
Hi.
After this, we get a montage of people coming to Holmes and Watson for help, but Sherlock being bored by almost all of them, until we're greeted with a good old-fashioned murder mystery. A man comes to Sherlock distraught after finding another man dead by a lake. Right before he was found dead, the man saw him standing by the lake perfectly fine, looking up into the sky. After trying to start his car, the engine backfires, and when he looked back at the man, he was dead. This hasn't really got anything to do with the story, and Sherlock just solves the mystery later by himself.
I was in the middle of a case, Mycroft.
What, the hiker and the backfire? I glanced at the police report. A bit obvious, surely.
Transparent.
I won't beat around the bush. We all know what happened.
By the time the driver looks up, the hiker's already dead. What he doesn't see is what killed him. A boomerang.
Yeah, it was a boomerang. A boomerang killed him. And if you've ever thrown a boomerang before, then you'd know how important it is to keep your eyes on it at all times. It will easily carve a chunk out of your skull if you're not careful. This is the dumbest thing Moffat has ever written.
Well, I mean, it was... I still think... I thought then, and I still think to this day, perhaps depressingly, that that's the best script I've ever written. I do actually think that. I thought, as I was writing, I thought, God, this is this is the one. I've got this.
Anyway, Sherlock and John go to Buckingham Palace, where they're told about the job to find and snatch the sex photos from Irene. And this is a pretty good scene. It's a funny concept to have Sherlock and John accepting offers of help from the Queen herself while Sherlock is dressed in only some sheets. And the jokes in this scene I think are pretty funny.
Here to see the Queen?
Oh, apparently yes.
Not denying Moffat's comedic writing here, but he may fall back on it a lot, but he knows how to write a funny scene. I also like the introduction of Irene. It's unclear what put Sherlock off from being able to read her, whether it be the shock of her coming in nude, or if it's the lack of clothing inhibiting his deducing qualities, which doesn't really make sense now that I think about it. The scene when the Americans come in demanding the safe be opened is pretty great. It's been done before in this show, but it's a good use of tension, putting Sherlock in a position where he has to decipher something with a ticking clock. Although it would have been nice to see him actively work out the code in a way where we'd understand, rather than him just putting in some numbers and then later told what the numbers were referring to. Same with the booby trap in the safe. I don't know how he knew it was going to be there, when not long before he was sure it contained the documents they were looking for. I get Sherlock is a genius and we should never be ahead of him, but they found ways to communicate how he comes to conclusions in the past, and when he just keeps doing things that turn out to be right but we don't know why, it can feel a little disorientating. Anyway, we get a bit of filler with the Christmas scene, and then we go to the morgue. I assume on the same day, no idea how Molly got there. Her presence here is communicated in a way that implies she wasn't just at Sherlock's flat like 10 minutes ago. We find out Irene's dead and Sherlock is sad, but then we find out Irene's alive. Something tells me Moffat was really feeling himself while writing this dialogue.
You flirted with Sherlock Holmes.
At him. He never
Now,
replies.
Sherlock always replies to everything. He's Mr. Punchline. He will outlive God trying to have the last word.
It's very melodramatic, but John and Irene are speaking in these weird, windy riddles. I know that this is sometimes Moffat's style of dialogue writing, and it isn't exactly a regular for this show, but it just kind of feels forced in the scene for me. From this conversation, Sherlock finds out Irene is alive, and I like the sequence that plays out after this. In interviews and premieres, Moffat's been very clear, as well as Gatiss and Benedict's interpretation, that this isn't a love story. That it's more complicated than that. At its simpler terms, these two people are interested in each other, sure, but the lines are definitely blurred. And this is well communicated through this fixed shot and excellent score showing a mixture of anger, heartbreak, confusion, probably directed to himself more than Irene, with no dialogue to ruin it. And then the great tone switch as he pieces together what happened at his flat. It's a little drawn out and overly dramatic, but in the context of the scene, I think it works. But then this scene of the Americans holding Mrs. Hudson hostage feels a little half-baked and pointless.
First, get rid of your boys. I dislike being outnumbered. It makes for too much stupid in the room. Next, you can stop pointing that gun at me.
So you can point a gun at me?
I'm unarmed. Moron.
Do you mind leaving us alone, please? Yeah, sure, why not? I mean, Sherlock does call him a moron, but still, this is the dumbest thing a man with his job and his experience could do.
First, get rid of your boys. First, get rid of your boys.
Daddy's had enough.
So then Irene gets back and Sherlock deciphers the code on her phone, revealing there's a terrorist plot to bomb an airplane. Sherlock works this out, allowing Irene to work it out, who then messages, "You guessed it."
Bye.
I'm not overly mad Moriarty was always involved in this plot. Up till now, we've only seen him in the previous episode, so he's not overused at this point. I do find the montage of Mycroft getting increasingly stressed very funny. There was definitely a better way to communicate this rather than just a montage of him looking more and more distraught. We find out the government were aware of the planned attacks and were going to let them happen to a stinky plane full of stinky dead people. Irene turns up and we get the final scene of these three negotiating and deducing their way to potential victory, with Sherlock figuring out that Irene's admiration for him lost her the game. Pretty cool reveal. Obviously no phone lock screen looks like this, but she could have made it, or it could have just been a fairly crappy interface, but I think it works. Irene is supposed to be dead by Watson and Mycroft until we find out, nope, Sherlock saved her from some armed terrorists with a sword. Fucking ridiculous. Now, as an episode, just looking purely at the episode, A Scandal in Belgravia, written by Steven Moffat as the first episode of Series 2 of BBC's Sherlock. I think it's pretty good. The story is intriguing, production's good, acting's great for the most part, it's well paced, a couple crummy exchanges of dialogue and an absolutely boomerangy scene, but other than that, it's fine. A 5 out of 10 piece of TV and an 8 out of 10 episode of Sherlock, if that makes sense. Now, what I say next might make some people who have negative feelings towards this episode quite angry. If you feel like you're going to get quite angry, please skip to this time code in the video. If you fundamentally disagree with my take on what I'm about to talk about, leave your opinion in my comments section, please. A huge reason this episode is disliked by many people is the fact that it's different from the book. There are obviously some more reasonable people whose criticisms go further than just this fact and are able to explain why the specific different choices that were made are what makes it bad, which I'll also give my 2 cents on. But I've genuinely seen people give this episode a 1 or 2 stars simply because it's different from the book. Who gives a fuck? An adaptation isn't a transcript. You're shifting the IP to an entirely new medium. It's gonna be different. I don't know why some people have such a difficult time grasping this fact. There are elements of a book that just can't be transferred to the screen, or maybe they can, but they won't be nearly as effective as they were in the book. So a choice might be made to use the medium the adaptation is using to the most effective degree possible. But a more sensible criticism with this episode specifically is that the changes made devalue the character of Irene Adler, which I don't know if I completely agree with. In the original book, A Scandal in Bohemia, Irene Adler became so iconic because of the story ending with her beating Sherlock Holmes, and she gets away to be married to the love of her life, and most importantly, this gives Sherlock an opportunity to alter his perspective on women. Sherlock before this clearly had some silly views on women, considering when it was written, but Irene's intelligence makes him rethink this generalised view he's had all his life. In this episode, however, Sherlock quote-unquote wins because of her love for him. Now, on the surface, looking at those facts, I'd say yeah, the character doesn't have the same value imparted on her as she did in the book. But does she have less value? If the point of Irene in the books was to alter Sherlock's outdated perspective on women, that aspect of her character isn't exactly necessary in a modern day setting where this version of Sherlock doesn't harbour those same views. Looking at her actual character, her intelligence certainly isn't inferior to that of her book counterpart. She stays one step ahead of Sherlock for most of the episode, and she does push him to decipher the codes for her, ruining Mycroft's plans. She's able to stop Sherlock from reading her when they first meet, she tricks him into thinking she's dead, she manipulates him into inputting the wrong code into her phone multiple times. So what exactly is it about this version of her that's devalued as a woman? Is it that she falls in love with Sherlock? If you want to argue that this aspect of the story is predictable or cliche, yeah, sure, I kind of agree. But does she have any less value for falling in love with a man? And no one involved in the making of this episode even accepts this analysis. It's simply her infatuation with Sherlock that allows her to make this small mistake, losing her this final game between the two, but the infatuation does go both ways. I personally don't really care about these two's relationship, but the only thing Moffat's done with this character is expanded on her so that the story can stretch to 90 minutes long and deepened the connection between her and Sherlock in an attempt to make her more vital to the story. Now, I want to reiterate, I don't love this episode. I don't really care about this episode, but in no way do I think Moffat devalued or disrespected the source material. I just think he wrote an okay piece of television with his little pixie face. But anyways, that's Sherlock. I'm not going to go any deeper into it. It's an okay show with some cool moments and some corny moments and some dumb moments and some stupid moments. But now I want to switch to the second show Mark and Steven wrote with each other.
When they approached me, I was like, yeah, but are you sure the world needs another Dracula?
After Sherlock ended or was cancelled or, who cares? Gatiss and Moffat decided we haven't had enough Dracula interpretations. He's been done every which way, through books and films and shows, from the pale looming silhouette of 1922's Nosferatu to the deeper tragic bloodsucker Gary Oldman portrayed in Bram Stoker's Dracula. He's iconic, rich in historical significance, influential, a manifestation of menacingly macabre morals, but now he's sexy. Yeah, that's right, yeah, you know. Yeah,
boy. Yeah, that's
you know.
right.
I was super duper excited for this show after the first teaser in 2019.
Try and stay calm. Yeah,
doing very well.
It felt faithful to the gothic horror tone of the source, and Closebang from the short clip of him in this teaser looked intriguing and sinister. And the "from the makers of Sherlock" tagline did intrigue me more than if it was written by someone else I didn't know. As baffling as some of their narrative decisions can be, I at least knew that this show would do something interesting. But it's only 3 episodes long, let's go one by one and figure out what went well and what went horribly, horribly wrong. Episode 1's a pretty faithful adaptation of the source material, the first 2/3 centering around Jonathan Harker's experience at Dracula's castle, and the last third being Dracula killing a bunch of nuns. Obviously, keep in mind I'm focusing solely on the show itself, as anyone familiar with the source material pretty much knows how the story's going to play out from the beginning. The portrayal of Jonathan Harker is pretty well done, and his character is nicely established, with simple lines here and there showing what kind of a man he is.
You were afraid, and yet you spent your days searching the castle because you thought someone needed your help.
Well, my help had been requested. It would have been difficult to refuse that.
Difficult?
Unacceptable.
This fleshing out of his character just adds to the tragedy of him, as well as hammering home the unsympathetic nature of Dracula himself. And Dracula is really well portrayed in this first episode. This was my first introduction to Closebang, and I think he did the perfect job. This episode also introduces us to Agatha, who, in this first episode, sucks. I completely get what they were going for with this character, but to me it does not work. Firstly, I love how Moffat and Gatiss have a true distinct style of writing. I think that's a great strength for any filmmaker or writer, but they do fall down the hole of writing every single protagonist as the fucking Doctor.
A dog can sniff stories on the slightest breeze, or we are blind in the wind. Faith is a sleeping draught for children and simpletons.
Not everyone is the Doctor, Steven. Sherlock Holmes isn't the Doctor. Van Helsing isn't the Doctor. Oh, spoiler alert, she's Van Helsing. This quippy, quick-witted, zippity-doodah dialogue, I understand is trying to show us she's not your standard Dutch 19th century nun, but having her speak like she's from 2010 London isn't how you do that.
This is a house of God.
A house of God, is it? Well, that's good. We could do with a man about the place, eh, sister?
Honey, it was ruined when she bought it. Yeah.
It's anachronistic. You might as well have given her an iPhone to make her stand out from the crowd. I mean, the thing is, if it was anyone else writing this, I probably wouldn't have a problem with it. Like, she's a fleshed out character. She's intelligent, she's observant, she's educated. This is all pretty well reflected in her dialogue and her actions. Maybe this is a problem with watching so many shows written by the same man in succession. I think it's more a problem of a writer being way too dependent on his own style.
Is there anyone living in this castle?
No, Jonathan. There's no one living here.
I really don't have a problem inherently with these corny puns, but there's so many of them.
They are without flavor. Perhaps you mean character?
Simply remain on my side and I shall absorb you.
Your presence has invigorated me.
Fresh blood.
Wine was open, I assumed. Perhaps I could pour you some, Count.
I do not drink wine.
You said you didn't drink.
Wine. It must have been a cold embrace.
You do look rather pale. Well, you do look rather drained.
You are what you eat. Because, I mean, Stephen Merchant and
Mark Gatiss.
And
Steven Moffat.
Stephen Moffat and Mark Gatiss,
Yeah.
they are very funny.
Indeed.
And I actually asked them, so do you think we need 3 jokes on each page? And they were like, well, it was shooted.
Yeah.
And then we'll take some of it out if it's too much. If it's too much. Yeah, because I said, this needs to be scary. It's Dracula.
I don't think 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of these puns would have taken away from the horror aspect of the show, but they do very quickly become a huge pain in the neck. I mean, after a while they can become so draining. I mean, on reflection, I don't want to sound cross, but These constant puns were a grave mistake, and for me they were the final nail in the coffin, and it really makes it hard for me to sink my teeth into. Thing is, I think a bit of cheese goes a long way in these types of shows. I'm happy that they tried to feed into the campy tone, but I don't think they did a very good job at combining the campy and horror elements. You know, from the rich, grand presentation, the music, the cinematography, the, you know, scenes of melodramatic dialogue, these one-liners thrown in here and there just really feel out of place. Don't get me wrong, the majority of this episode is very good. Aside from the corny line here and there, it's a very solid hour and a bit of television. Although I would like to talk about one scene that narratively doesn't make sense. So Dracula takes Johnny outside to finally kill him, but before this we get a pretty good scene of Dracula asking Johnny to describe the sun to him. He hasn't been able to look at it since he first turned, but his enamoration with it is still present. Johnny says no, Dracula snaps his neck, and then Johnny begins to turn. But he's still holding onto his willpower, so he stands on the edge of the castle ready to throw himself off when this happens. So Agatha asks why Dracula screamed, but Johnny doesn't know, until, for no reason, she has this revelation. Now, anyone who's been watching up to this point is probably thinking the same thing. We were just told for the first time that sunlight is toxic to Dracula. Most people would have gathered from the initial scene of Dracula screaming that Johnny's cross must have reflected the sunlight. We knew he was wearing the cross throughout the episode, it makes sense. But if anyone didn't infer that here, then they would 5 minutes later when we see the scene again and there's a clear shot of Johnny's cross reflecting the sun. But if anyone didn't infer that here, then they would 30 seconds later when Agatha says,
"You are facing the sun."
Okay, yeah, we're all on the same page. It's strange they're treating this as a revelation because it's pretty painfully obvious, but at least it makes sense. Right up until Agatha goes on to say,
I have sought to find God all my life and never found a sign of him anywhere. Why now? Why you? Why him?
What?
Dracula fears the cross.
Huh?
He fears the symbol of our Lord.
Why are you saying this?
Dracula, prince among vampires, fears the cross.
Where did you get this idea?
Do you understand what that means?
No.
God is real.
What?
God is real.
What are you talking about? Now, I understand Dracula fears the cross in almost every adaptation, but this revelation about it makes no sense. Imagine Johnny was making a lasagna one night at the castle. He gets his own ingredients and lays them all out, ready to make his delicious meat sauce. But he accidentally arranged his garlic bulbs into the shape of a cross. Dracula comes in, sees the cross-shaped garlic and screams. It would then make no sense to infer he must be afraid of garlic. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, look, I don't want to over-explain myself, but we know for sure at this point sunlight is harmful to Dracula. Okay, we've been told that metal reflects light. Johnny's wearing a cross. He's facing the sun. He's facing the thing that Dracula, that we know that... But I mean, from what these characters know up to this point, it would have made just as much sense for this scene to take place. Agatha say, why did he scream? Johnny say, I don't know. And her go, it was your chest hair. Dracula fears chest hair. You fucking donut. I mean, the rules of this beast are so fucking important to the story that you named this episode The Rules of the Beast, and you made a key revelation to these rules extremely confusing. Anyway, Harker escapes to the convent, and the rest of the episode's pretty good. Dracula ripping his way out of the dog, and Harker being all weird. It's great stuff. It's also here we get the big reveal that Agatha isn't just some random nun. She's actually
Van Helsing!
But a woman version. I don't really have a problem with her being Van Helsing. I don't really see it as a waste of a character that could have been a Mark and Steven original. I mean, this is an adaptation of Dracula, obviously, and giving her this name is just a nice way to fill the audience in on giving her context to who she'll be in this story. It's the implication of her character that this name provokes, that's all it is. But the way it's treated as a revelation to Dracula is kind of odd. They sort of get away with it because the dramatic music and character reactions could be justified. You know, maybe their surprised faces and the dramatic score is simply because Dracula just proved his supernatural abilities by guessing who she is by tasting her blood. Which, could make sense if he didn't arrive to the coven inside of a dog. But it's the "my name is Khan" problem all over again. This name gives us, the audience, very heavy implications, but it shouldn't for any of the characters, so this big triumphant moment is kind of silly when you give it a second thought. Anyway, Dracula convinces Johnny to invite him into the convent, and then Johnny does, either because of some mind trance type thingamajig or because Dracula tells Johnny he'll do a mercy killing on him if he does. Neither really makes sense though. I mean, it's been established in Johnny's character that he would do anything to stop Dracula.
I will do everything in my power to stop you.
And seeing as he can just get literally any other willing participant to kill him, I don't know why this would convince him to let Dracula in. And if it is a mind trance thingamajig, then why did Dracula barter with him in the first place? The episode ends with Dracula entering the convent, killing all the nuns. He sets his dogs loose on them. He beheads one. Yeah, that's it.
Been dying to meet you.
Episode 2 is probably on par with episode 1. Whilst it lacks the big significant moments of the first, like meeting Dracula or the standoff at the gate, it makes up for it with much cleaner pacing and a simpler, more engaging story. It's Dracula on a big ship travelling to England, picking off the crew and passengers on the way. Instead of an alien, it's a vampire, and instead of a spaceship, it's a ship. But you're probably wondering, surely Alien or The Thing would be a pretty boring film if we were just following the monster's perspective as they murdered everyone on board, and it would completely diminish any stakes or character investment, and I would agree. But we get an added element of mystery to this episode, in the form of a chess match between Dracula and Agatha that the episode cuts to throughout. The main plot of Dracula being on the ship is being told to Agatha by Dracula during this chess match, but we're given no context to where or when this chess match is actually taking place. Another Steven Moffat original, but a good one, withholding the right amount of information to keep us intrigued but not leave us confused. We get some nice character building scenes to build all the characters who are going to get sucked dry by Count Succula later on. We get introduced to suspicious door number 9. Who's in there? What's going on? But apart from the setup mystery angles, the rest of the episode's pretty straightforward. Dracula essentially sneakily gathered all these people together on one ship, so that in the 4 weeks it takes to sail to England, he can both absorb different mannerisms and educations from these people, but also learn to have restraint when it comes to feeding before he gets to England.
I'm afraid I'm very careful with what I eat.
Me too.
One of the best parts of this episode is watching Dracula interact with the passengers. He has charisma and it's fun to watch him engage with them. And every now and then Stephen, or Mark, but this was probably Stephen, is able to write some dialogue that toes the line of corny and poetic perfectly.
I enjoy company and I like people.
Then why do you kill them?
Why do you pick flowers?
This whole scene is probably one of the best in the whole show. Dracula leaves the conversation at one point to drink the blood of one of the crew members for the sole purpose of taking on his ability to speak German, but inadvertently also takes on his stutter. Then he comes back and it's revealed he knew this woman from when she was younger. Part of the intrigue of writing a Dracula show but from a much more personal angle is that we get scenes like this. Interactions with people who hold Dracula as having some deep significance in their lives, whilst for Dracula they're just fleeting memories. The next night Dracula kills a young woman, which means it's officially a murder mystery, but Dracula has an ace up his sleeve, and as he should, because so far he's acted painfully suspicious to every single person on the ship.
It's the sea makes one ravenous. There is a killer on board. In plain sight.
Are you all right?
It's revealed that the person in number 9 is Agatha, and the chess match the two are having is just a hallucination she's having whilst Dracula sucks on her bloods. So what's left of the crew and passengers are about to kill Agatha until she tells them all that she's a vampire. She then bites her lip and spits the blood on Dracula, causing him to go all crazy. Which, it was a good idea, it was a clever idea.
Where is he? Where's Dracula? Where did he go? Was no one watching?
I mean, am I crazy or was that just an awful line delivery? So the gang band together and set Dracula on fire, causing him to jump into the ocean, and then Agatha comes up with a plan to blow up the ship to get rid of any trace of Dracula. A bit confusing. I mean, at this point, Dracula isn't even on the ship, so I don't know what this is accomplishing. But then he does get back on the ship, and they still go ahead with the plan, like it will kill him.
Go ahead. I win.
But you know he can swim because...
I swam.
And you know he can't drown because...
A drowned man walking and talking aroused a certain amount of curiosity.
I don't know, the plan seems just a little bit needless and confusing, unless I'm being a big dum-dum. Now, this scene is pretty important for the absolute fucking mess that is episode 3. Dracula reveals to Agatha that his fear of the cross comes from man's fear of the cross.
It's not a symbol of virtue and kindness. It's a mark of horror and oppression. Your idiot church has terrorized the peasant population for centuries, and I have been imbibing the blood of those same peasants for so long. I have absorbed their fear of the cross.
Very, very interesting idea. I like it.
No.
Oh.
That's all very nice and logical, but that's not the reason. I know when you're lying.
Why would I bother lying to you?
You wouldn't. It's not me to whom you're lying.
I do like how this comes back in episode 3 though, so we'll get there when we get there. Dracula gets in his coffin, which sinks to the bottom of the ocean, and then he breaks back out. But uh-oh, it's modern day.
So, I mean, obviously Sherlock, famously, you did Sherlock in the 21st century. I mean, was there any of your consideration of doing this in the 21st century, or is Dracula very much a period piece?
No.
I do really love how this was communicated, being tricked into thinking it's only been a few minutes until the sound of the helicopter, but holy fuckity fuck sticks, what they do with this twist is an absolute mess.
What kept you?
I'm so sick of the trope where a descendant of a character looks identical to that character. I mean, how often does this actually happen? Especially this many generations removed. My own parents look nothing like me. Anyway, that's the end of episode 2. Episode 3 begins with a flashback revealing Agatha made Dracula spare Mina's life to take hers at the end of episode 1.
Come, boy. Suckle.
This horrible line will be congruent with where the rest of the episode goes. Now, I'm not going to argue with the decision to set this episode in modern day. It's all about execution. They could have easily done something interesting and fresh with this idea, but seeing him in a black suit in this house just feels like every other show that's a modern retelling of an old fictional character. Also, a large part of why the first 2 episodes were so good was the way that they were told. Episode 1 started at the convent with Harker recounting his interactions with Dracula, and episode 2, as I already mentioned, had the chess game between Dracula and Agatha. This built intrigue. The non-linear storytelling here served to give us investment in the story. The characters alone couldn't give us this investment because we're following Dracula as our main character.
You suddenly realise how much of almost any story depends on the moral centre or lack thereof of the main character. You know, on their journey towards morality or their loss of it or whatever, you realise that usually stories have a character whose moral dilemma you're going to follow. And here you are with the character who doesn't have a moral dilemma. He just wants to eat people.
It's ingrained in us from the very beginning that most of these side characters that we meet are probably not going to survive. So the story needs to be told in an interesting way to make up for this lack of investment. But contrary to episode 1 and 2, episode 3 is told in a completely linear structure, which means it's not only missing the intriguing mystery elements of the first 2, but now they've plopped us in a completely new time with completely new characters except for Dracula. So now for the very last episode, we start off with the least amount of investment that we've had for this entire show. So Dracula escapes the beach and then gets into this woman's house, puts her husband in a fridge, compliments her house, to which she says,
"C'est donc."
I mean, sure, I think it's pretty nice. And then we get a really nice moment of Dracula looking at the sun in the TV.
So beautiful.
This is what I mean by modern day Dracula is purely down to execution. This sort of stuff works. It's subtle commentary on technology being able to expose us to aspects of the world we previously would have never seen. And in no way does it feel pandering or embarrassing. But later on in the episode, watching Dracula choose his victims by swiping left and right on Tinder is the opposite of subtlety. and it is embarrassing. So Dracula drinks New Agatha's blood, but it makes him all sick. But before we're told why, we're introduced to this little boy. What's his name? I don't know, and I don't care, because it's time to go to the club. Those last 2 episodes were boring. Where was all the relatable teen stuff? And the texting and the emojis? Where were the selfies? Where were the fucking selfies? I'll say it again. The idea of setting Dracula in modern day isn't a bad idea. What is a bad idea is trying to cater to not only an audience extremely very out of your wheelhouse, Mark and Steven, but an audience that wasn't previously catered to in the first 2 episodes. Why in Steven's brain is modern day related to solely clubbing and Tinder? This isn't It's a Sin, Steven. You're not Russell. So we get like a 10-minute scene establishing this love triangle before this kid gets called into work. He works at the Jonathan Harker Foundation, basically a big organisation dedicated to catching or testing or somethinging Dracula. I don't know.
Another negative, I see?
Vanilla.
Get some more unique blood, you fucking dick. So they put Dracula in a cage, and we get a pretty cool scene of New Agatha trying to take his blood. We find out that New Agatha has cancer, which is what made Dracula sick earlier. Wait a second. Nothing stupid has happened for over 9 minutes.
I'm Count Dracula's lawyer.
His what?
His lawyer.
His lawyer?
Sorry.
Mark Gatiss shows up as Dracula's lawyer, contacted by Dracula because they gave him an iPad to read books, and the Wi-Fi password is the word Dracula. Just gonna let that one sit for a bit. Gatiss says that Dracula's been unjustifiably imprisoned and they need to release him. New Agatha drinks Dracula's blood for some reason, and then Lucy, who's the girl from earlier who was at the club, who that skinny dude likes, calls his phone, but Dracula picks up because he has his phone. And then I guess they have like a relationship for about 3 months that we don't see. 3 months later, pink party limo, Dracula's on a treadmill and wearing trackies. I don't see how anyone who loved the gothic horror elements of the first 2 episodes would even like the complete inverse here. It's jarring. I enjoy shows like Euphoria and Skins and It's a Sin, but there's a reason style and tone consistency is almost always a necessity. Dracula takes Lucy to the graveyard, and we learn some more about the confusing rules of the undead brought up in episode 1. I've waited until now to bring this up because I don't think I'll ever really understand it. So, as Agatha says in episode 1, there's apparently a plague of sorts that only infects certain people, which means some people after death become undead. Dracula's one of those undead people, but he's like less feral, I guess, than the others. When you die, you stay dead for a bit, I think, but your soul is alive, and then after some time, then your body reanimates. But sometimes it happens instantly, like with Harker in episode 1. I don't really understand. So Dracula and Lucy are at the graveyard, and we hear the moans of the undead still in their coffins, and they're going, Hey, help me, hey. I mean, it's classic Moffat reusing an idea from Doctor Who.
The dead remain conscious. The dead are fully aware of everything that is happening to them.
Don't cremate me.
My God, I'm being cremated.
No. Do not let them burn you.
I think Dracula says that children sometimes wriggle out their coffins or something.
Some of the little ones wriggle their way to the surface. I think they can smell the worms.
What are you talking about? What the fuck are you talking about?
You know, people don't usually say that to me.
Yeah, you kill them before they can. Basically, you're blocking people.
Yeah, that's how we speak. That's how the youth speak. Killing, yes, it's basically the same as blocking people, like on Facebook or Instagrams. Dracula sucks Lucy dry, and now she's dead. Or, no, she's not. Oh shit, I forgot to say. So, New Agatha drank Dracula's blood, but so now she can sometimes see old Agatha, because Dracula drank her blood before, so now she has his blood in him, which has her blood, so now sometimes they'll like talk about Dracula together, which is relevant to the plot. Alright, she is dead now. Wait, no, she's not. Okay, so her soul is alive, but her body's not at the moment, but it will be later on, I guess. I genuinely don't know. This is my 5th rewatch, and I don't know what the fuck is happening. So we see Lucy's funeral. Her fiance's there, and he's just clearly bored. He's like looking at his watch. I guess he's like getting a fly because he brought his carry-on like bag with him like into the funeral. Why didn't you leave it in your car, bro? And then she gets cremated. The thing is, this whole scene has like great potential to be a really horrifying and emotional moment. Lucy's essentially being burnt alive, and they decide to take that over the top. I mean, this is primarily a horror, is it not? So why for the most psychologically horrific scene in the entire show would you double down on the comedy elements? I'm going to skip to the finale because I can't be asked. So Agatha tracks down Dracula to his house. How?
One just looks for an unnecessarily tall building, multiple exits, and no view of a church.
That's so fucking stupid. That's so fucking stupid. Lucy turns up. I like how they draw out the reveal of what she looks like. And when we finally get the reveal, it looks pretty sick. In a good way. I've got to say, the prosthetics in this show they've been really good so far.
Lucy Westerner, there has never been a day I didn't want to kiss you.
We can skip this. That was kind of cool. Right, now, this last scene. Alright, we're at the end. When I first watched it, I kind of loved it. And then when I watched it for a second time, I still kind of loved it. And now for my fifth rewatch, I think I still love it. The lead up right before the final confrontation is ridiculous. That random jump on the table and run over to the curtains is pretty laughable, but disregarding that for a second, after the curtains fall down, the mix of the great score and the imagery of the shadow of the cross on Dracula's face, it's really powerful.
Consider Count Dracula, who cannot bear to look in a mirror. Dracula, who won't stand revealed in the sunlight, who cannot enter a home without invitation. These aren't curses, they are merely habits that become fetishes, that become legends that even you believe. But why? What are you afraid of? You are a warrior. From a long line of warriors. Your grandfather died in battle, your father, your brothers, your sons, their sons. All of them fell as heroes on the battlefield, but not you, the warlord who skulks in the shadows and steals the lives of others. Unwelcome everywhere, who sleeps in a box of dirt yet dreams of a warrior's grave, who suddenly found himself in thrall of a girl in love with the thing he fears the most, death. And now we know why this works, because it speaks of the courage you long to possess, the courage it takes to die.
And I love this unmasking of Dracula's true fears. This exploration of him is how this series should have ended. But this final scene is still littered with cringy dialogue or lines just ripped straight out of Doctor Who again.
Consider Count Dracula.
Consider the Doctor.
And it's so frustrating. You have the great music, you have the talented actors, you have purposeful direction and cinematography, you have the perfect concept for an ending. The way you planted the seed multiple times for his longing to see the sun, and the way you found consistency in all the Dracula rules relating to his fear of death. This show could have been so good. This is the thing with Moffat and Gattis's work. Together, they're not a bad duo. I think they can find the best in each other. There's always clear potential for greatness, but they also bring out the worst in each other, so they almost always fumble. Overall, I don't know if this is a good series or not. Even though 2/3 of the show is, they seem to have a great skill of making the worst aspects overshadow everything else. If they ever band together and make anything in the future, I probably will watch it, but I know it will probably frustrate me. Anyway, so after Dracula ended, Moffat and Gatiss parted ways, and Steven got back on the solo screenwriting horse. As much as I thought Doctor Who, Sherlock and Dracula would be the most interesting segments of Moffat's career, I was surprised when I finally got to the last two shows he's written up to this point. When you've had a career as long as his, you're bound to have highs and lows. Towards the end, most writers would have what either they, their audience, or in whatever objective realm art can exist in, the best and worst projects of your career. Strangely, at least in my opinion, both of these extremes happen to sit currently right at the tail end of Steven's work. Meaning, I believe that the last two shows Steven created are the very best script he's ever written and the very worst he's ever written. But before we get there, there's a couple credits of his that I missed out. These are projects for whatever reason I didn't want to dedicate too much time to, but they're still poignant times in his career, so we're going to quickly go through them now. So for those who don't know, there was a Tintin film that came out in 2011, directed by Steven Spielberg. And for the role of writer on this film, Spielberg contacted who else but our lovely boy, Edgar Wright. but Wright was unavailable, so Mr. Moffarino was brought on board. The reason I didn't really want to give this one a lot of talking time is because I have no clue how much of the film was actually written by Steven. As I said, Edgar Wright was unavailable, so Steven was brought in by recommendation of Wright to whip up a quick draft, which he did, but because of the writer's strike and a certain showrunner role Steven just picked up, he couldn't finish the script. So Wright was brought back on board along with his mate Joe Cornish to finish the script. But then Wright ended up having to leave as well to focus on Scott Pilgrim, so Joe just finished it by himself. It's kind of hard to do a deep dive on a writer's work when you have no idea what was actually written by the man. Although this could just be a placebo effect, but you can kind of feel remnants of Moffat's quick-witted and triumphant, smart-sounding dialogue throughout the film.
Bad news, Captain. We've only got one bullet. What's the good news? We've got one bullet.
But nevertheless, Tintin is actually a really good film. The writing did its job, the plot wasn't anything too innovative, but it was fast-paced and entertaining. But it's really the direction and animation style that elevates it. Won a Golden Globe, I think. I'm pretty sure. It was a good film, a really good film. Well done, Steven, you're in the big leagues now. Big Hollywood blockbuster film for Steven Spielberg. You're at the tippy top. You've broken the glass ceiling, and you're at the top of the Hollywood hills. Big Hollywood, big boy, peasants below. Hollywood, you've done it. You're in the big leagues. Big Hollywood, big. In 2022, Steven decided to give us a new adaptation of Audrey, the second name's on screen, don't really want to attempt that one to be honest, 2003 novel The Time Traveller's Wife. HBO commissioned 6 episodes and not many people watched it. I was vaguely aware of this show's existence when it came out, but I was really confused when I realised Moffat was the one who wrote it. I mean, he's been very open about taking inspiration from the book for the River Song subplot on Doctor Who, which is an interesting take on a very famous book that's already been adapted once. So why he'd want to write his own adaptation that doesn't really divert much from the source material at all is kind of strange. But yeah, if you know the story, it's just that, with some added filler. The two leads are British, doing American accents, don't really have much chemistry, the old age makeup's really bad, oh and the main protagonist is a massive groomer. I never read the source material, but I know the story pretty well. I saw the one with Hulk. But this show at times can be very uncomfortable to watch, and a lot of the time it feels unintentional. Obviously the main character can randomly flick forwards or backwards through time, and he keeps meeting who will become his wife when they get older. That's the plot. But he kind of strikes up a relationship with her when she's a child, and then like throughout her life, and he's usually a grown man. Now he's very adamant that this isn't a relationship at this point, but he's definitely grooming her. I feel like the show tries to justify it by saying, well, they end up together anyway, so he's just fulfilling the prophecy. But what? No. You don't have to sit and have countless picnics with her while she's a child. Or do you need to do this? Inseminate yourself into her life while she's young, so that she'll then fall in love with you when she's older. Okay, that makes sense. Now that's the definition of grooming. Now whatever about the book, okay, I guess it was written in 2003, it was a different time. But I'm talking about the show that was written in 2022, and had an opportunity to really explore how kind of fucked up the premise is, but Steven chose not to. The main character brings up grooming at one point, but is treated as just a throwaway gag, but no effort's made to explore it, probably because it would be too hard. Art should challenge, art should be difficult, but when no effort is made to explore these difficult questions, it makes me feel like the show is unaware of the story it's telling me. Overall though, it's an average show, kind of boring. Some actually good emotional scenes here and there, but whatever, I've already talked way more about it than I actually want to. Russell T Davies recently took back the showrunner role on Doctor Who, and we got an okay season of Doctor Who, although Steven was brought back for another one-off episode, which I was very excited for. Moffat's track record for one-off episodes under Russell's showrunning has been nothing short of perfection in the 2000s, so I was hoping the same would apply here. And Boom was probably my favourite of the season, that or 73 Yards, but I still wouldn't say they're up to the same calibre of either of the pair's best work. Boom was a pretty good concept, but unfortunately I felt it was really let down by production. The set they stayed on for the entire episode I found quite bland. It's important for a bottle episode to make the main set interesting or unique, but for Boom it was just a soundstage battleground that didn't look very distinct. Also, the performances of almost every single character that wasn't the Doctor or Ruby were kind of bad, especially the little girl. Holy fuck, she was fucking awful. The best parts of the episode were definitely the first 15 or so minutes with just Ruby and the Doctor trying to navigate the situation they're in, but when you start introducing a girl who I don't care whether she lives or dies, or a guy and a girl who secretly like each other who I don't care whether they live or die, the rest of the episode can be a bit of a slog. Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson were good though, and there were some delicious intense scenes, but it's just a shame. I feel like the writing was done a disservice by the production, but what are you going to do? I mean, Moffat can still write Doctor Who in his sleep, and I know that a Christmas episode just came out, right? But it's November, I haven't seen it yet. But if I were to review it now, I'd say it was alright, it was okay, and the bit with the dinosaur was cool. I'll cut this if it doesn't apply. Alright, that's it for housekeeping. Let's get back to the last two shows of Moffat's career. So as I mentioned, these last two shows I think show Moffat both at his absolute best and absolute worst. Both are a 4-episode long miniseries drama, both were released within the last 2 years, and both were a concoction of Steven's own mind, not an adaptation or already established IP like most of his work over the years. But one I think is great, and the other is not. Netflix's Inside Man, which came out in 2022, I believe is the very worst script Steven Moffat has ever written. And to convince you of this, all we need to do is simply go through the plot. So Inside Man is a 4-episode drama starring David Tennant, Stanley Tucci, Dolly Wells from Dracula, Lydia West from Dracula, Lindsay Marshall from Dracula, and Louis Oliver from Steven Moffat. He's his son. Steven's gone on record by saying this show's goal was to explore the human potential for murder. If the average person was put in a specific scenario, would they have the capacity to kill another person? And this is an interesting concept to explore. It's intriguing and feeds into our morbid curiosity. Although where he missed the mark is nobody in this show makes decisions that anyone would ever make. And I'm not even referring to snap decisions, reactions from people in the heat of the moment. Full established character motivations make zero sense. This paired with the story basically depending on ridiculous plot contrivances and conveniences, and it's one of the most frustrating shows I've ever watched. David Tennant plays Harry Watling, a vicar in a small town. He lives with his wife and son, and his son is being tutored maths by Janice, played by Dolly Wells. One day at Harry's church, Harry's verger comes to him and asks him to hide his flash drive containing pornos.
Vicar, could you hide my porn?
Because his mother's coming to the church and she always rifles through his stuff. Harry says fine, puts the flash drive in his pocket and then leaves to pick up his son's maths tutor Janice. He drives back to his home. Harry puts the flash drive in a bowl of stuff on a shelf, and then suddenly Janice needs a flash drive. Uh-oh. Here's a random flash drive I found, says Harry's son. Obviously, upon seeing this, Harry swoops in, grabs it off of them and makes up a reason for why they can't use it. And then that's the end of the show. Not really, he does this instead.
Is that my flash drive?
Yeah,
No, there's private stuff on there.
She don't want to look at anything, she's just moving files.
Is it still ringing?
So she plops the flash drive in and then this happens.
Can I explain something slightly complicated? It's kids.
It's kids. It's children. The porn, it's children.
Yeah, pretty intense, sticky situation we're in. Janice straight away thinks that the flash drive belongs to Harry's son, so immediately Harry hastily and truthfully explains the entire situation, makes complete sense. Janice understands, they get the police involved, Harry's verger rots in a fucking prison, and then the series ends. Not really. What follows is the most unintentionally and painfully frustrating scene of television I've seen in a very long time.
That flash drive is not bent. Let me just explain this.
Yeah, no, I think I understand.
No, you don't. This was given to me. A man at the church. A very troubled man.
What man? Who?
I can't. Doesn't matter.
But why would he give it to you? Why would you take it? That doesn't make any sense.
It's not bent. That's the only thing you have to understand.
What are you doing?
I'm taking it.
Why?
Well, mine. It's mine.
Why? Sorry, editing Stan here, just something I wanted to point out. So during the initial argument that you just saw, the entire scene culminates in David Tennant saying, it's mine, the flash drive is mine. But for some reason, like towards the beginning of the argument, there's a point where David Tennant kind of mumbles something, and then Janice says, yours?
What are you doing?
I'm taking it.
Why?
Well,
yours?
This was right before he fake confessed to her that it's his, so I don't know why she said that. Shit. So the reason why Harry is so conflicted to rat on this PDF file is because he knows his verger is very troubled. There's probably some mental abuse from his mother, and so he believes him to be a unalive risk. And he keeps this stance for a majority of the show, and he's barely challenged on it. You know, he'd rather go down for this himself than let harm come to another person, which is so noble. Oh yeah, he's such a good man. He's noble to a fault. This is what I feel like the show's trying to tell us, but no, there are other victims involved here. As sympathetic as you want to be to this troubled verger, allowing this to continue is far from the moral thing to do. After this, a scene commences of Harry following Janice round the house as she trips over random things and becomes more and more battered and beaten until finally she falls down the basement stairs, and Harry decides, fuck it, I'll lock her in there. I'm fully aware what this show is intending to do, because Moffat has told me what it's trying to do, but it simply doesn't succeed at this. These are the chain of events that are supposed to dictate the rest of the show. Harry's not in a morally grey situation to where there's no right or wrong answer. He's chosen the very wrong answer, and he's never questioned on this. Janice getting locked in the basement isn't due to a heat of the moment snowball effect where things just got out of hand. It's because she's extremely clumsy, and Harry, whilst wanting to de-escalate the situation, decides to escalate the situation. Harry tells his wife about the situation, and she says exactly what went through my mind.
Is she vegetarian?
Oh wait, no, not that.
What the fuck were you thinking? What the fuck?
But then straight away she starts asking questions like,
is there anything down there?
What do you mean?
In the cellar? Is there anything that she could use to get out?
So that's it. She acknowledges, well, this is our life now. She's going to stay in the basement. That's pretty much the only thing we can do. I feel like this is Moffat trying to go for a Tarantino or Coen Brothers style of dialogue. Like the quirky, mundane, conversational writing during dark or morbid circumstances to add comedic effect.
Well, we have to feed her, don't we? It's pork chops or chicken. We could have a Chinese.
But those sorts of scenes usually work when the scene involves deeply flawed or dark characters, but I mean, these two aren't that. They're supposed to be regular people who have been dropped in this situation against their own will. I mean, Harry at least seems kind of distraught by the situation, but from the wife's perspective, she's a normal suburban Christian mother. She left for work in the morning, came back to find her husband has locked their son's maths tutor in the basement because he's awful at diffusing situations, and straight away she's like, oh, is she vegetarian? I think, because I might order a Chinese, but I'm not quite sure if she likes chicken. Well, maybe this character is that she reacts very strangely to things. Maybe that's how Steven wrote her. She reacts weirdly to things, she reacts unnaturally to things, and doesn't recognise when her husband's done something needlessly excessive. But then every now and then she does.
What the fuck were you thinking? What the fuck?
They keep saying things like,
today you are a man who assaulted a woman and locked her in his cellar because you were so desperate to protect your son.
As if that's the main motivation to keep her in there. They say, well, if she gets out, she'll go to the police and their son will be questioned, which is enough to ruin his life. People would just assume he's a paedophile. But You have the flash drive. Take it to the fucking police. I'm sure police can determine who the drive belongs to. Do that now, get the verger done, and Janice might press charges against Harry, so what? That's a lot better than just keeping her in there forever.
The central theme of Inside Man is that anyone can be a murderer. You just need a good reason and a bad day.
Can any regular Joe fall into this situation, Stephen? Is this really exploring how far a regular person would go? These are not regular people. These are people whose realities are so specifically insanely warped. These are people whose main motivations are to complicate their lives to the highest degree possible. Harry goes down to talk to Janice every now and then, and I don't even know what her motivations are, really.
Pipe just beside you there. We are reasonable people who just got themselves, through no fault of our own, into a completely unreasonable situation.
Are they yours, then, Gus?
We need to take a step back from this whole stupid business.
No, they're a toy. No, I hope you haven't used them.
They're just, just a present, a sort of joke present when we got married.
Of course. Just like the child pornography on your son's flash drive has nothing to do with him. You better have cleaned these.
I swear I'm not cutting out context. I don't know why she restrained herself either.
She will go straight to the police.
We don't know that.
She has no choice.
Of course she does.
There's a paedophile being protected by his father, the local vicar. Do you think she's just going to forget about that? You assaulted her. Do you think she's just going to let bygones be bygones? Would you bet your son's whole future on it?
Why is this even a discussion? Just go to the police first. Bring the flash drive. Give them the name of the owner of the flash drive. There's extremely damning evidence on there. There won't even be an investigation, you dimwits. I mean, you're not selling me on this conundrum. It's barely a conundrum. Suddenly, for no reason, Harry just decides, I'm going to find Edgar and get a confession out of him. Where's your moral compass now? What, now you don't care what happens to Edgar? That was the only reason you're in this fucking mess.
Do you want this back? Your flash drive, do you want it back?
That's not mine. Jesus Christ. Later on at the church, Harry does end up getting a confession out of him, but seeing how upset this poor man is because of his own terrible actions, Harry then decides, I'm not going to get the police involved.
Listen to me, you never go anywhere near that stuff again. None of that! Ever again! You're ever tempted? You remember what I did for you, what I did to myself for you, then just stop. Just stop.
And then he does something, not even stupid and nonsensical, but disgusting and irredeemable for this apparently morally grey character.
There's all the stuff on my hard drive. Edgar's porn. I downloaded a bit more. Found some more material online.
Oh, Jesus.
I printed out a few images, put them in my safe like they were hidden.
Why?
To be convincing.
Nobody, not even his wife, takes the time to explain to him, Harry, hey honey, by protecting this man, you are putting others in harm. And now you're actively engaging in it, you weirdo.
You have fucked this family.
I have saved this family. Ben won't be destroyed. You won't kill a woman in our cellar. Ben's safe, you're safe, Janice is safe.
Edgar's safe.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with any of that? What is wrong with keeping people safe? I'm a vicar. I'm supposed to do that.
I don't have a problem with this character being naive and being stupid and having the most flawed and warped morals of any character ever. But when he says things like, I'm a vicar, I'm supposed to keep people safe, nobody challenges him on it. This just makes me think the show isn't aware. Moffat definitely isn't fucking aware. I'm baffled by these weird narrative decisions.
Anyone can be a murderer. You just need a good reason and a bad day.
Harry finds out that Edgar ended up committing suicide after his confession, along with leaving a suicide note. The same man Harry was going to go to prison for, the same man whose name Harry didn't want to give up because he was scared he would harm himself, finds out he did, and this is his reaction.
I think there's a chance this will be okay. We might have been given a way out. If the note is a confession, then I really think this is over.
Consistency. Oh, by the way, there's an entire subplot that I haven't even mentioned because it's not very important. For the whole series, we flick back and forth to a prison in America where Stanley Tucci is on death row for killing his wife, but he also solves crimes or something. They keep talking about how he murdered his wife in such a horrific way, but we never get any actual details, which I think is supposed to sort of feed into the theme of anyone can be a murderer. But I mean, there doesn't really seem to be anything wrong with them. It was this subplot that kind of reminded me a bit of season 1 of Fargo. Spoilers for Fargo, but in the first episode, Martin Freeman's character is driven to the point where he hits his wife over the head with a hammer. And as horrific as that scene is, we completely understand his motivations as a character. You know, just in the way he speaks and his mannerisms are very subdued, and there's just something off with him. You know, where he meets up with his bully or he's constantly being talked down to by his wife, it all builds to this moment, and it helps us understand why he did what he did, which helps us engage in the story. But Stanley Tucci just seems like a normal man, and we're told he murdered his wife. We're never told why he did what he did, and we're never once shown how or why he could be capable of doing something like this. It just leaves him as a bit of a blank slate. The connection between these two plots is this woman comes to Stanley Tucci to write an article on him or something, but after Janet goes missing, newspaper woman asks Stanley Tucci to solve her disappearance. How do they know each other? They met once on a train. And the rest of the show is just that, basically. Them trying to solve the disappearance and Harry and Mary going back and forth with the idea of killing or not killing Janet. All interconnected with the same badly written dialogue and extremely convoluted scenarios to introduce new elements of danger every now and then. It never gets any better from here. If you want to watch it, it's on Netflix. Be my guest. I don't know what was going on with Moffat during the writing of this show. Usually, even when his scripts are bad, there's odd lines here and there that are well written, or certain themes or ideas that hold some sort of merit, but everything about the writing of this show fell completely flat on its face. And you can only imagine my surprise when finally I got to the last project Steven's written and was presented with a show that had, in my opinion, the most consistently great writing of any series Moffat has ever penned. Douglas is Cancelled is a 2023 ITV miniseries, the basic plot involving around a famous news presenter facing backlash after an old joke he made years before surfaces. Out of all the shows I've talked about in this video, I think Douglas is Cancelled is probably the least known about, and so I don't really want to spoil the plot, because anyone who hasn't seen it definitely should. Given the subject matter, I was a little bit worried before watching it. I had no idea what Moffat's opinions on cancel culture were, and I was very prepared for a series of modern Ricky Gervais level commentary, but the show explores themes and ideas so much deeper than the surface level perspective. The complex situations and terrifying truths this show examines I genuinely feel are important to watch. Everyone's acting was great, especially Karen Gillan, and the writing was still Moffat's same old style, but it fit the story he was telling perfectly. Obviously there's some political and social commentary in this show, but I do feel like it explores all angles, with almost every character representing a specific perspective. But yeah, keeping this one short, I mean, it's a show you should definitely watch if you haven't, and if you do, it's a lot better to go in blind. So that's it. That's every show from Steven, looked at under a little microscope. As inconsistent as this man can be in terms of quality, I think all that shows is he's not afraid to take risks. He clearly loves the line of work he's worked so hard to get into, and he's a true inspiration for any aspiring writer. I mean, the show he grew up watching, he was able to have full creative control of for a period of time, and that was fully down to his unmistakable talent. You don't write scripts like Blink or Heaven Sent or Listen or The 11th Hour, The Empty Child, Silence in the Library, World Enough and Time by sheer luck. And say what you want, but during this entire review, I've never used the word boring. He's almost always exploring concepts that are interesting and worth exploring, but more importantly, his work radiates his own distinct personality, which is a truly great aspect to have as an artist. Is Steven Moffat a good writer? Yeah, of course he is. Whatever he decides to write next, I will be first in line. Unless it's a fucking play.